Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. Um, this time you've given us selections from Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's Flow, the Psychology of Optimal Experience. And it looks like we're going to be looking at, how we can achieve happiness and meaning in a world that can often feel indifferent to those things.
Right.
We're also going to be looking at the power of attention and how to create flow, those moments when you're completely absorbed in enjoying what you're doing.
Yes, exactly.
Let's see what we can uncover.
Yeah, what I think is so interesting about Csikszentmihalyi's work is this paradox that he highlights. You know,
Right.
we have access to more comforts, more knowledge, more entertainment than ever before.
Right.
Yet so many people still feel unfulfilled.
Yeah, it makes you wonder why.
It does. It really
Why is
does.
that?
Well, he calls this phenomenon rising expectations. Our desires for things increase faster than our ability to actually meet them.
Oh, so you're always kind of striving for more, but never quite reaching that satisfaction.
Yeah. And, think about
Is that almost like something that's built into society?
I think if you consider how marketing and consumerism constantly bombard us with these messages about what we lack and how their product or service is the missing piece to our happiness or fulfillment.
Right.
It's a cycle that keeps us constantly on that treadmill you mentioned, running towards a satisfaction that's always just out of reach.
Okay. So how do we break free from this cycle?
Well, Csikszentmihalyi argues that directly chasing after happiness is a dead end.
Okay.
And I think I can relate to this on a personal level.
Yeah.
I had a period in my life where I was striving for a specific career goal.
Okay.
And the more I focused on achieving that goal,
Mm.
the more pressure I felt. And honestly, the less I enjoyed the process.
Yeah.
It was only when I shifted my focus to the work itself, to really mastering the skills and the knowledge involved, that I actually started to experience a sense of fulfillment,
Right.
regardless of the outcome.
That makes so much sense. It's like that Viktor Frankl quote, don't aim at success. The more you aim at it and make it a target, the more you're going to miss it.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And he goes on to say that success like happiness cannot be pursued. It must ensue
Okay.
as the unintended side effect of one's personal dedication to a course greater than oneself.
Wow.
So it's about finding that meaning and purpose in what you do
Mm.
rather than just focusing solely on the outcome.
I see.
And Csikszentmihalyi takes this idea even a step further
Uh,
with his work on flow.
how so?
Well, he talks about how our attention is this finite resource. It's like psychic energy.
Okay.
We can choose to squander it, or we can learn to invest it wisely in things that matter.
Right.
And he introduces this concept of psychic entropy. Have you ever noticed, like, when your mind is undirected,
Uh-huh.
it easily kind of slips into this spiral of worry,
Mm.
anxieties, negative thoughts?
Yeah.
It's like leaving a garden unattended. Weeds start to grow, and pretty soon it's a mess.
So how do we cultivate a well-tended mental garden, so to speak?
Well, this is where this idea of flow comes in.
Uh-huh.
This is Csikszentmihalyi suggests we can order consciousness by focusing our attention on activities that challenge us in a way that matches our skills.
Okay, so like what kind of activity?
Well, imagine a rock climber.
Mhm.
They have to focus completely on, finding the next handhold, the next foothold.
Right.
There's an immediate sense of purpose and challenge in each movement.
It's interesting how he uses examples for flow activities that range from playing chess to performing surgery
Yeah.
to even working on an assembly line.
Right.
You wouldn't necessarily think of all of those as being, enjoyable activities.
Well, and that's kind of the point. He highlights that any activity really can become a source of flow if approached with the right mindset.
Okay.
Take, for instance, the assembly line worker, Rico Medellin.
Okay.
He approaches his job like it's an Olympic event, constantly striving to beat his personal best for each task.
Right.
And so even though his supervisors might not necessarily notice or care,
Right.
that internal feedback loop, that sense of progress, keeps him engaged and motivated.
Yeah. It's fascinating how we can kind of create our own feedback mechanisms, even in tasks that might seem monotonous or boring.
Absolutely. And that really underscores that flow is not just about the external activity.
Okay.
It's an internal state.
So what makes these activities so conducive to flow?
Well, they usually have a few things in common.
Okay.
Clear goals, immediate feedback, and a balance between the challenge of the activity and your skill level.
Okay.
You become fully immersed in the moment and everything else kind of fades away.
It's like you're carried away by the current.
Exactly.
Almost like when you're, really engrossed in something you enjoy doing.
Yes.
It's like that feeling.
And this isn't just about, feeling good in the moment.
Okay.
Csikszentmihalyi argues that flow actually helps us grow and develop a more complex sense of self.
Okay, so it's not just about fleeting moments of enjoyment. It's
Yeah,
it's a pathway to a richer and more fulfilling life overall.
exactly.
I see.
And this growth happens through two key processes,
Okay.
differentiation and integration.
Now, what are those?
So differentiation is about developing your unique skills and talents,
Hmm.
becoming more distinct as an individual.
Okay.
And integration is about connecting with something larger than yourself,
I see.
whether it's a community, a cause, or even just the natural world.
So it's like flow helps us stand out as individuals
Yep.
while simultaneously weaving ourselves more deeply into the fabric of something larger.
Exactly. You become a more vibrant thread in the grand tapestry of existence.
Wow. I like that.
It's a beautiful concept, isn't it?
Yeah, it
Right.
is. But even if we master this whole flow thing, Csikszentmihalyi reminds us that the universe doesn't really care about our happiness, does it?
Well, yeah,
He even makes a comparison between a meteorite destroying New York City and a virus killing Mozart.
that's right.
Yeah.
He acknowledges that in the grand scheme of things, our individual happiness might seem insignificant,
Right.
but that doesn't mean that we're powerless.
Okay.
While we can't control, external events.
Right.
We can learn to control our consciousness, our internal experience.
So where do we even begin with that?
No.
It feels like a daunting task.
It might seem that way, but Csikszentmihalyi offers a really powerful analogy, learning to swim.
Oh, yeah, I remember this one. He says water can be both good and bad, useful and dangerous. To the danger, however, a remedy has been found: learning to swim.
Exactly.
What does that mean?
We can't change the fact that water, can be dangerous, but we can learn to navigate it.
Right.
We can even find, immense joy and freedom in it.
Okay.
Similarly, by mastering our consciousness,
Uh-huh.
we can find meaning and enjoyment even when we face adversity.
Okay.
We can even transform those random meteorites into challenges to
Let me
overcome
see.
opportunities for growth.
It's like taking those seemingly random, even negative events and turning them into something that strengthens us.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And this leads to Csikszentmihalyi's argument that our institutions, things like our workplaces, schools, our social systems,
Yeah.
should be designed to promote flow.
Oh, that's a fascinating idea. We've been talking about how individuals can cultivate flow,
Yeah.
but what would it look like to apply those same principles to the systems that we live in?
It's a really interesting question.
Our workplaces, our schools, our social structures.
Right.
What if those were designed to help people experience more flow?
Well, imagine a workplace where you're not just going through the motions,
Hmm.
but you're consistently engaged and challenged,
Right.
where you know your skills are being utilized and appreciated,
Yeah.
and you feel this sense of progress and contribution.
That sounds ideal, but also somewhat utopian. Do you think that's actually achievable?
Well, maybe not in its purest form, but I think striving towards that ideal could lead to some significant improvements.
Okay.
Imagine, educational systems that prioritize curiosity and creativity
Yeah.
over rote memorization,
Right.
where learning is an engaging and enjoyable process
Right.
rather than, a chore.
Mm-hmm.
Or think about, social spaces that foster meaningful connections instead of encouraging isolation and mindless consumption.
Yeah. So it's like we need a pretty significant shift in values.
I think so.
Moving away from it, this constant pursuit of more,
Yes.
and focusing on the quality of our experiences, our connections, our
That's-
contributions to something larger than ourselves.
Absolutely.
Okay, so much to think about already. But before we kind of get ahead of ourselves,
Yeah.
let's break down exactly how this flow state works on a personal level.
Okay.
What are the mechanics of those optimal experiences?
Right.
What makes them tick?
Good question. You're right. Understanding the mechanics is crucial. You can't just sort of stumble into flow.
Hmm.
Csikszentmihalyi actually breaks down the specific conditions that need to be in place for it to happen.
Okay, so let's unpack those conditions. He starts by talking about clear goals.
Mhm.
What does that mean in the context of flow? It sounds pretty straightforward.
Yeah, it's not just about having, some kind of general aim. It's about knowing exactly what needs to be done at any given moment.
Okay.
So think about a surgeon. Each incision, each stitch has this precise purpose within the overall goal of the surgery.
Right.
Or a musician improvising a solo.
Okay.
They're reacting to the music in real time,
Right.
making these split-second decisions about which notes to play next.
So it's kind of like breaking down those larger objectives into these smaller, more manageable steps.
Exactly.
And each step then becomes like its own little mini goal,
Yes.
contributing to the overall flow of the activity.
Right. And here's the crucial part.
Yeah.
Those goals have to be challenging enough to fully engage your skills,
Okay.
but not so difficult that they overwhelm you.
I see.
Think about playing a game
Uh-huh.
against someone who's much, much better than you.
Right.
You'd quickly become discouraged and probably give up.
Right.
But if you played against someone you know far above your skill level,
Yeah.
it would get boring fast.
It'd be no fun.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So flow exists in that sweet spot
Okay.
where your skills and the challenge are kind of perfectly matched.
That makes sense. It's like finding that perfect level of difficulty in a video game.
Yes.
Where you're challenged but not frustrated.
Exactly.
But how do you know you're in that sweet spot?
Right.
That's where that immediate feedback comes in, right?
Absolutely. Imagine you're playing a video game, but there's no score, no indication of whether you're winning or losing.
Right.
It wouldn't be very engaging, would it?
No, not at all.
So flow activities provide this constant feedback that allows you to adjust your approach and stay on track.
Okay, that makes sense. And he uses the example of Rico Medellin, the assembly line worker, to illustrate this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Even though Rico's job might seem repetitive, to an outsider,
Yeah.
he's found a way to make it a flow activity.
Okay.
He approaches it like an athlete,
Uh-huh.
constantly trying to improve his time for completing each task.
Wow.
So even though his supervisors might not notice,
Right.
that internal feedback loop, that sense
Yeah.
of progress, keeps him engaged and motivated.
It's fascinating how we can kind of create our own feedback mechanisms, even in, seemingly monotonous tasks.
Yes.
So we've got clear goals, immediate feedback. What else is essential for entering that flow state?
Another crucial element is complete concentration on the task at hand.
Okay.
When you're really in flow, everything else fades away.
Right.
You lose track of time, your to-do list disappears,
Right.
and you become completely absorbed in the activity.
I can relate to that when I'm writing. I often lose myself in the process. Hours can pass without me even noticing.
Yes.
It's like entering a different state of consciousness almost.
Exactly. And Csikszentmihalyi calls this the merging of action and awareness.
Okay.
Think about those moments when you're so skilled at something that it feels effortless.
Yeah.
Like a musician who's been playing for years,
Mm-hmm.
their fingers move across the instrument without, conscious thought.
Right.
So in a flow state, your actions become so fluid that they almost seem to happen without your conscious direction.
It's like your body takes over guided by years of practice and ingrained knowledge.
Exactly.
But if you're kind of losing self-consciousness and flow,
Yeah,
does that mean you lose your sense of self entirely?
that's a great question. And Csikszentmihalyi makes a distinction here.
Okay.
It's not about losing your sense of self.
Okay.
It's about losing self-consciousness.
I see.
So you're not constantly evaluating yourself,
Yeah.
worrying about how you look or what other people might think.
Okay.
You're simply present in the moment, fully immersed in the experience.
So it's more like a temporary suspension of that inner critic,
Exactly.
the voice that's always judging and evaluating.
Right. And that freedom from self-evaluation can be incredibly liberating.
Okay.
It allows you to fully experience the activity,
Right.
to stretch your limits and, in a way, to discover new aspects of yourself.
I see.
You're not limited by those usual self-imposed boundaries.
That's interesting. And that kind of brings us to another interesting aspect of flow, the sense of control that we experience in it.
Yeah.
But isn't that a bit of a paradox,
Yeah.
given that we're talking about losing ourselves in the activity?
It is a paradox.
Yeah.
It's not about controlling the outcome.
Okay.
It's about feeling in control of the process.
I see.
You're not a passive observer.
Right.
You're actively shaping the experience.
Right.
You're making choices, responding to feedback, adjusting your approach.
Mhm.
And that sense of agency is incredibly empowering.
He even talks about how people can experience flow in, games of chance,
Yeah.
like poker or roulette.
Yeah. Think about it. While the outcome of those games, involves chance.
Right.
Skilled players focus on what they can control,
Mm-hmm.
their strategy, their betting patterns, reading their opponents.
Right.
So it's that perceived control,
Okay.
that belief that their skill, is influencing the game that makes it so engaging and
Right.
potentially flow-inducing.
So it's about finding those elements of skill and decision-making, even in activities that might seem to be
Yes.
purely based on luck. It's about taking ownership of your experience,
Right.
however unpredictable it might be.
Exactly. And this leads to another important point that Csikszentmihalyi makes.
Okay.
Flow isn't about escaping reality.
Okay.
It's about transforming it.
Okay, now that's interesting. How can flow help us deal with the more difficult aspects of life,
Right.
the challenges that we can't just choose to ignore.
Yeah. He shares some really incredible stories, actually, of people finding flow in incredibly difficult situations.
Like what?
Well, he talks about prisoners in solitary confinement who created, elaborate poetry contests
Wow.
using soap for ink and, tiny scraps of paper to share their work.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It really drives home the point that flow isn't dependent on external circumstances. It's
Mhm.
this internal state of mind.
Yeah.
Even when facing those extreme limitations, they found a way to create a meaningful and engaging experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And he also talked about, individuals who've experienced, really life-altering events,
Oh.
like paraplegics learning to adapt to their new reality.
Right.
And instead of succumbing to despair, they found new challenges and goals,
Right.
pushing their limits
Yeah.
and discovering, new sources of joy and fulfillment.
So it's about finding those opportunities for challenge and growth, even in the face of adversity.
Yes.
It makes you realize that the potential for flow exists in every situation,
It does.
even the most challenging ones.
Yeah.
But for those of us not facing, such extreme circumstances,
Right.
how do we cultivate this flow mindset in our everyday lives?
Well, Csikszentmihalyi emphasizes that flow can be found in any activity, even the seemingly mundane.
Okay.
He talks about, the simple joys of walking, gardening,
Uh-huh.
even just paying attention to the world around us.
Right.
It's about approaching those activities with intentionality, setting mini goals, seeking feedback, and, really immersing yourself in the experience.
He even talks about listening to music as a flow activity,
Well-
something that I think most of us probably do without much conscious thought.
Exactly. But by, actively listening,
Okay.
paying attention to the nuances of the melody, the rhythm, the emotions the music evokes,
Right.
you can transform that passive experience into a flow state.
Okay, so it's about finding those opportunities for engagement and challenge,
Right.
even in those activities that we might take for granted.
Exactly.
What about those times when we're not actively engaged in something?
Uh-huh.
He also talks about the importance of solitude.
He does. And this is where it gets, I think, particularly interesting.
Okay.
He argues that individuals who can't find flow in solitude often struggle the most with finding, meaning and happiness in life.
Why is that? It seems kind of counterintuitive. You'd think being alone would give you that space to relax and recharge.
It can,
Mhm.
but it can also be a breeding ground for that psychic entropy.
Okay.
When you're alone with your thoughts
Yeah.
with no external distractions.
Right.
It's easy to kind of slip into that spiral of worries, anxieties, negative
Yeah.
self-talk.
Yeah.
So without the structure and focus of an external activity, your mind can become a very chaotic and unpleasant place.
So how do we tame that inner chaos?
Right.
How do we make solitude a source of flow
Yes.
rather than a descent into negativity?
Well, Csikszentmihalyi suggests developing what he calls a flow repertoire.
What's that?
It's essentially a collection of activities that you can turn to, in those moments of solitude.
Okay.
This could be reading, writing, playing an instrument, meditating,
Right.
anything that allows you to kind of focus your attention and enter that flow state.
So it's like having a toolkit for your mind.
Exactly.
Way to consciously direct your attention
Yes.
towards something meaningful and engaging, even when you're alone.
Absolutely.
But he doesn't just focus on those individual experiences, right?
Right.
He also talks about flow in relationships.
He does. And he makes, I think, a really compelling argument that relationships can be one of the most powerful sources of flow, but only if you approach them with the right mindset.
So it's not just about finding the right person. It's
Yeah.
about cultivating the right kind of dynamic
Exactly.
within the relationship.
Yeah, it's about, shared goals,
Yeah.
open communication,
Mm-hmm.
a willingness to kind of explore new activities and experiences together.
Right.
It's about supporting each other's growth
Okay.
while also, maintaining your individual identities.
So it's like that differentiation and integration that we talked about earlier.
Exactly. It's like a dance,
Right.
finding that balance between connection and independence.
And this flow in relationships isn't just about romantic love, right?
No, it extends to family friendships,
Yeah.
even interactions with your broader community.
So it's about finding those connections where you feel seen, heard, and challenged in a positive way.
Exactly.
That it seems like in, our modern world, it's getting harder and harder to find that kind of flow.
Yeah.
Even in social contexts, we're constantly bombarded with distractions.
Right.
Our attention is so fragmented and, genuine connection just feels increasingly elusive.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point.
Right.
And Csikszentmihalyi, acknowledges that, our increasingly fast-paced, technology-driven world
Right.
can make it really difficult to cultivate that kind of attention
Mm,
and focus that flow requires.
right.
However, he remains optimistic
Yeah.
that we can design our lives,
Meh.
our institutions, and our communities to promote more flow.
That kind of brings us back to that idea of, institutional flow
Yeah.
that we touched upon earlier.
Yeah.
What would a flow-friendly world actually look like?
Right.
And how do we even begin to make those changes?
Well, imagine workplaces that are, designed to be more engaging,
Okay.
where employees have more autonomy and, opportunities for creative problem solving.
Right.
Think about, educational systems that foster curiosity and a love of learning,
Uh-huh.
where students are, active participants
Mm-hmm.
rather than passive recipients of information.
Right.
And picture communities where, people prioritize face-to-face interaction and meaningful connections over mindless consumption and social media scrolling.
So it sounds like we need a pretty significant shift in values.
Yeah, I think so.
Moving away from that constant pursuit of more,
Right.
and focusing on the quality of our experiences,
Exactly.
our connections,
Yeah.
our contributions to something larger than ourselves.
Absolutely.
So for you, the listener, what does this all mean?
Right.
I think the biggest takeaway from our deep dive into Csikszentmihalyi's work
Yeah.
is that happiness isn't something that just happens to you.
Right.
It's something you cultivate.
Yeah.
It's about understanding how your mind works, learning to direct your attention,
Uh-huh.
and finding those activities that allow you to enter that flow state, that state of complete absorption and joy.
Right.
And maybe, just maybe, by creating more flow in your own life,
Yeah.
you can inspire those around you to do the same.
Absolutely. What Csikszentmihalyi ultimately offers is a call to action. He's challenging you to become the architect of your own experience,
Wow.
to create a life that's rich with meaning, purpose, and flow.
And as you continue exploring these ideas, here's a question to ponder.
Okay?
He focuses a lot on individual flow,
Yeah.
but could this concept be applied to groups as well?
Right.
Could we create, social structures, communities, even movements that operate in a state of flow?
It's a fascinating question.
It is. It's a fascinating question and perhaps a topic for a future deep dive. But
Yeah.
until then, keep flowing.